My brother didn't wait for the lawyer to finish reading Grandpa's will. He grabbed the keys, hugged my parents, and called me the family loser. Nobody noticed the lawyer quietly say, "Mr. Dlamini, there's one clause your son hasn't asked about. My name is Lethabo Dlamini, a 35-year-old quantity surveyor from Johannesburg." My older brother, Saifo Dlamini, had always believed our parents' love entitled him to everything Grandpa built. I thought losing my inheritance was the worst day of my life. I was wrong. It was the first day the truth finally started catching up with my family. The lawyer slowly opened Grandpa's final will, and the whole room became completely silent. My parents sat beside Saifo with proud smiles on their faces, already believing they knew exactly what Grandpa had decided. Saifo leaned back in his chair with so much confidence that he looked as if everything already belonged to him. Then the lawyer began reading. One by one, he listed the family construction company, several commercial buildings across Johannesburg, Grandpa's investment accounts, and even our grandparents' beautiful home. Every one of those valuable assets was left to Saifo. My parents could not hide their happiness. My mother reached over and hugged him, while my father proudly said, "Your grandfather finally gave everything to the right son." Saifo looked across the table at me with a smile that made it clear he believed he had won. I stayed quiet, trying not to let my disappointment show on my face. When the lawyer finally came to my name, the room became almost awkwardly quiet. I was left with only a small amount of money and a sealed letter from Grandpa. The lawyer handed it to me carefully. Inside, Grandpa had written only a few simple words. He thanked me for always asking the right questions and told me never to lose that habit. I read the letter again, wondering why those words seemed more important to him than giving me money. Before I could think about it any longer, laughter filled the room. My parents smiled at each other as if Grandpa had finally admitted that Saifo deserved everything because he was the successful son. As everyone celebrated, the lawyer did something that nobody else seemed to notice. He looked directly at Saifo and calmly asked if he wanted to read every obligation and condition attached to accepting the estate before signing the documents. Saifo barely looked at the thick file in front of him. He laughed confidently and said there was no need. He believed Grandpa would never hide anything important inside legal papers. The lawyer politely asked him a second time, reminding him that accepting an inheritance also meant accepting every responsibility connected to it. Saifo did not even ask a single question. Without reading a single page, he grabbed the pen, signed every document, shook the lawyer's hand, and smiled proudly. At that moment, everyone believed the story was over. None of them realized it had only just begun. Only a few days after Grandpa's funeral, Saifo walked into the company office, like he had already changed everything. He called all the managers and senior employees into the meeting room and stood at the front with a big smile. He proudly announced that the company was entering a new era. He said the old way of doing business was too slow and that he wanted faster profits. He spoke about selling expensive construction equipment that Grandpa had owned for years. He wanted to close some departments, remove experienced workers with high salaries, and bring in younger people who would accept lower pay. He also announced that he was planning to merge the company with a wealthy investor who promised to double the company's profits in a very short time. My parents were excited by every word he said. They praised Saifo for being bold and called him a true businessman. They even laughed and said Grandpa's old methods belonged in the past. But while my parents were smiling, I noticed something very different around the room. None of the employees looked happy. The people who had worked beside Grandpa for 20 or 30 years stayed completely silent. They looked at each other with worried faces, but nobody argued with Saifo. After the meeting ended, several of those trusted employees quietly packed their personal belongings instead of signing the new contract Saifo had prepared. They thanked their coworkers, shook a few hands, and walked away without creating any drama. Watching them leave felt strange because these were people who had helped build the company from almost nothing. They were not workers who gave up easily. One elderly site manager, who had worked with Grandpa for more than 30 years, slowly walked over to me before leaving. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and looked into my eyes. In a calm voice, he said, "Your grandfather never built this company for fast money. He built it so families could always have work, even during hard times." Then he quietly walked away without saying another word. His words stayed in my mind for the rest of the day. I began noticing that Grandpa's oldest employees were not afraid of losing their jobs. That was not what worried them. They all seemed concerned about something much bigger. It was as if they knew there was an important part of Grandpa's plan that Saifo had completely missed. And for the first time, I started wondering if Grandpa had left behind more than money and buildings. Maybe he had left behind a lesson that nobody had understood yet. About a week later, another surprise arrived. The company's external auditors sent an urgent request asking Saifo to meet with them before any property, equipment, or company accounts could be transferred into his full control. The meeting was marked as very important, and they explained that it should happen before he signed any new business deals. When Saifo read the message, he smiled and pushed it aside. He said they were only wasting his time with unnecessary paperwork. According to him, he was now the legal owner, and nobody had the right to slow him down. Instead of accepting the meeting, he focused on talking with the investor who had promised him quick profits. Every day, he became more excited about selling company assets and changing everything Grandpa had built over many years. My parents fully supported him. They complained that too many professionals were trying to interfere with Saifo's success. My father shook his head and said that lawyers, accountants, and auditors always created problems to make themselves feel important. My mother agreed and said they were probably jealous because Saifo had inherited such a successful business. They believed everyone should simply step aside and let him do whatever he wanted. Hearing them speak with so much confidence made me uncomfortable. I kept remembering how carefully Grandpa had always listened whenever experts gave him advice. He never rushed into big decisions, no matter how exciting they looked. On the day of the meeting, the auditors still came to the company office, hoping Saifo would change his mind. They waited patiently in the conference room with several files neatly arranged on the table. Saifo walked past the open door, glanced inside for only a second, and kept walking without stopping. He did not greet them or ask why they wanted to see him. He simply told his assistant to inform them that he was too busy closing an important deal. The auditors quietly packed their documents without arguing. They looked disappointed, but not surprised. As they were leaving, one of the senior auditors noticed me standing near the reception desk. He walked over slowly and gave me a kind smile. In a calm voice, he said, "Sometimes people inherit ownership without realizing they've also inherited promises." For a moment, I did not fully understand what he meant. Before I could ask another question, he politely nodded and walked out of the building. I stood there thinking about his words. Grandpa had trusted these auditors for many years. They were not people who enjoyed creating delays. If they were trying so hard to warn Saifo, there had to be a reason. Deep inside, I began feeling that the real inheritance was still hidden somewhere, waiting for the right person to discover it. A few days later, Saifo finally announced the deal he had been talking about since Grandpa's funeral. He proudly told everyone that he had found a wealthy buyer for one of Grandpa's biggest commercial buildings. According to him, selling the property would bring in millions of dollars immediately, and that money would help him completely change the business. He invited my parents to celebrate with him even before the sale was finished. My father proudly told friends that Saifo was already proving he was a better businessman than Grandpa. My mother smiled and said this was only the beginning of an even bigger future. They all acted as if nothing could stop him now. Saifo met the buyers at a large law office to sign the agreement. Everything seemed perfect. The buyers were happy, their lawyers reviewed the documents, and Saifo confidently signed every page. He shook hands with everyone in the room and proudly called my parents to tell them the deal was almost complete. They were so excited that they immediately started talking about expensive holidays, new cars, and all the things the family would enjoy after the money arrived. But only a few hours later, everything changed. Saifo received a phone call from the buyer's legal team. At first, he looked confused. Then his face slowly turned pale. He kept saying, "That can't be right. There must be some mistake." After the call ended, he rushed back to the law office demanding answers. The buyers had suddenly canceled the entire deal. Their lawyers had discovered something unexpected during the final legal checks. A registered estate restriction was attached to the commercial building. As they looked deeper, they found that the same restriction appeared on every major property, company asset, and investment Grandpa had left behind. Until that restriction was properly resolved, none of those important assets could legally be sold or transferred the way Saifo had planned. Saifo became furious. Instead of asking why the restriction existed, he immediately blamed everyone around him. He accused the buyers of finding excuses to escape the deal. He claimed corrupt officials were blocking his success. Before long, he even blamed me, saying I must have secretly convinced someone to interfere because I was jealous of his inheritance. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I had never spoken to the buyers or their lawyers. My parents stood beside Saifo without questioning him. They insisted someone was trying to steal his success. They repeated that Grandpa had given him everything, so nobody should be allowed to stop him. But the facts did not change. The sale was officially canceled, and the property could not be touched. Desperate for answers, Saifo rushed to Grandpa's lawyer and demanded an immediate explanation. The lawyer remained calm, listened carefully, and then quietly said that he would not discuss the restriction before the next scheduled estate review. He explained that everything would be answered at the proper time and asked Saifo to be patient. Saifo stormed out of the office, angrier than ever. As I watched him leave, I could not stop thinking about one question. If Grandpa had placed restrictions on every important asset, what was he trying to protect, and why had nobody been told before now? After the failed property sale, I could not stop thinking about everything that had happened. Too many people had tried to warn Saifo before he signed those papers. The lawyer had asked him to read every document. The auditors had requested an urgent meeting. Grandpa's oldest employees had looked worried from the very beginning. None of it made sense to me. I felt that all of them knew something important, but nobody wanted to explain it directly. I decided that instead of waiting for answers, I would start looking for them myself. Over the next few days, I visited people who had worked with Grandpa for many years. I met retired engineers, project managers, accountants, and supervisors who had helped him build the company from the ground up. I expected someone to tell me about hidden money or secret legal documents. Instead, every conversation became a story about Grandpa himself. One retired engineer smiled as he remembered their early years. He said Grandpa never chose people because they spoke the loudest. He always watched how they behaved when nobody was paying attention. A former accountant told me that Grandpa believed money could disappear overnight, but a person's character stayed with them forever. An old project supervisor laughed softly and said that Grandpa often tested people without telling them they were being tested. According to him, Grandpa believed the best lessons were learned naturally, not through long speeches. The most surprising thing was that every person I met repeated the same idea in different words. Grandpa never rewarded the person who wanted the prize first. He rewarded the person who protected what everyone else depended on. Sometimes that meant keeping workers employed during difficult times instead of making bigger profits. Sometimes it meant refusing business deals that looked exciting but carried hidden risks. Grandpa always believed that protecting people was more important than chasing quick success. As I listened to their stories, I slowly stopped thinking about the inheritance as money. It began to feel like something much bigger. Maybe Grandpa had never wanted to find the smartest businessman in the family. Maybe he wanted to find the most responsible one. When I returned to the company office, I looked around with different eyes. The buildings, machines, and bank accounts were valuable, but they were not the real foundation of Grandpa's success. The real foundation was the trust he had built with employees, clients, and families over many years. That trust could not be bought or sold. For the first time, I started believing that Grandpa had planned every part of this inheritance very carefully. It was never meant to be a simple gift handed to the first person who claimed it. It felt like one final lesson, one final test that would reveal who truly understood everything he had spent his life building. And somehow I felt that the biggest answer was still waiting to be revealed. The day of the next estate review finally arrived. Everyone gathered in the lawyer's office once again. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. There were no smiles, no celebration, and no excitement. Saifo looked frustrated and impatient. My parents believed the lawyer was finally going to remove the restriction that had stopped the property sale. They expected everything to return to normal. I quietly took my seat and waited. Deep inside, I felt that this meeting would answer many of the questions that had been growing in my mind. The lawyer opened a large file and calmly looked around the room before speaking. He explained that Grandpa's will was not only about giving away money, buildings, or the company. It also included legally binding succession conditions. Anyone who accepted control of the estate also accepted every responsibility written inside those documents. He reminded everyone that he had asked Saifo more than once to read every page before signing. Saifo had refused and signed everything without asking a single question. Saifo quickly interrupted him. He argued that nobody had explained those conditions clearly. The lawyer remained calm and gently replied that every condition had been included in the documents placed in front of him on the day he accepted the inheritance. He had been given as much time as he wanted to read them. No one had rushed him. The decision to sign without reading had been entirely his own. The lawyer then began reading the succession conditions aloud. During the transition period, no major company property could be sold. The core business could not be dismantled or broken into smaller parts. Long-serving employees could not be dismissed simply to increase profits. Major changes to the company's structure required approval under the succession plan. Grandpa wanted the business to remain stable while leadership changed hands. As every condition was read, I slowly realized what had happened. Almost every decision Saifo had proudly announced during the past few weeks had gone directly against those obligations. He had tried to sell one of the largest commercial properties. He had planned to remove experienced employees. He had started negotiations to change the company's structure. Without realizing it, he had already broken several of the very promises he accepted when he signed the inheritance papers. Saifo's confidence disappeared. He stared silently at the documents lying on the table. My parents looked at each other, unable to believe what they were hearing. Nobody argued anymore. Nobody celebrated anymore. The entire room became completely silent. For the first time since Grandpa's will had been read, everyone understood that the greatest danger had never been hidden in the company. It had been hidden inside the pages that nobody thought were worth reading. The silence in the room lasted for several seconds. Nobody knew what to say. Saifo looked down at the papers in front of him, while my parents waited for the lawyer to tell them how this problem could be fixed. Instead of closing the file, the lawyer slowly turned one more page. He looked around the room and said, "There is one final clause that has not yet been discussed." Everyone immediately looked at him. Even Saifo, who had been angry only moments earlier, became completely quiet. The lawyer explained that many years before Grandpa passed away, he had created a protected succession trust. It had been carefully prepared with the help of financial experts and legal advisors. Grandpa did not want this trust to be shared immediately after his death. He believed that giving away such a large amount of money without proving responsibility could destroy both the family and the business. Then the lawyer revealed the amount inside the trust. $18.2 million. My parents gasped in shock. Saifo's eyes became wide with disbelief. I could hardly believe what I had just heard. None of us had ever known that such a huge fortune even existed. The lawyer continued reading Grandpa's instructions. The money did not belong to the person whose name appeared first in the will. It belonged to the person who successfully protected the family business for 12 full months, while obeying every succession condition written in the estate documents. The company had to remain strong. The employees had to be protected. The important assets could not be sold. Every promise Grandpa had written had to be honored exactly as he had planned. Then came the final part. If the first beneficiary failed to meet even those responsibilities, control of the trust would automatically pass to the alternate beneficiary named by Grandpa. No family meeting, no vote, and no special permission could change that decision. Saifo suddenly understood what had happened. The buildings, the company, and the investment accounts had never been Grandpa's greatest gift. They were only a test to see who would protect everything he had spent his life building. The lawyer quietly closed the file and looked at Saifo. "Your grandfather believed that anyone can inherit property," he said. "But only a responsible person deserves to inherit trust." At that moment, Saifo lowered his head. For the first time, he realized he had not lost the $18.2 million because of bad luck or because someone had cheated him. He had lost it the day he signed papers he never bothered to read. For a long moment, nobody in the room spoke. My parents looked completely shocked. They had spent weeks believing Saifo was the clear winner of Grandpa's inheritance. Now they finally understood that the most valuable part of Grandpa's fortune had never been the buildings, the company, or the bank accounts. Everything depended on the conditions that Saifo had ignored. My mother was the first to break the silence. With tears in her eyes, she looked at the lawyer and begged him to help. She said Saifo had only made an honest mistake. She insisted that he had not fully understood the legal papers and should be given another chance. My father quickly agreed. He said the documents were too long and too complicated for anyone to understand without legal training. He argued that Grandpa would never want his own grandson to lose such a large inheritance because of paperwork. Both of them pleaded for mercy. They kept repeating that Saifo never meant to break Grandpa's wishes. They believed there had to be a way to fix everything. The lawyer listened quietly before explaining that this decision was no longer his to make. The protected trust was managed by independent trustees, and they were required to follow Grandpa's written instructions exactly as they appeared. A video meeting with the trustees was arranged immediately. My parents repeated their request, hoping the trustees would show kindness and make an exception. The trustees listened respectfully, but when my parents finished speaking, their answer was calm and firm. They explained that Grandpa had already expected someone might use exactly that excuse. Because of this, he had left a personal written statement to be read if anyone claimed they did not understand the documents. The lawyer opened another sealed envelope and began reading Grandpa's words aloud. Grandpa wrote that responsibility always begins with reading what you choose to sign. He believed nobody should accept control over people's jobs, businesses, and family property without first understanding every promise they were making. He wrote that if someone ignored those responsibilities at the very beginning, giving them a second chance would only weaken the lesson he wanted to leave behind. As Grandpa's words filled the room, nobody argued anymore. My parents slowly lowered their heads. The same people who had laughed at me for asking questions now realized why Grandpa had always respected careful thinking. He had never been testing who was the smartest or the most confident. He had been testing who would take responsibilities seriously before making important decisions. For the first time in many years, everyone in that room saw me differently. They finally understood that Grandpa's greatest lesson had never been about money. It had always been about character. The weeks that followed were difficult for everyone in the family. The excitement that had filled our home after Grandpa's will was gone. Instead, there was silence, regret, and disappointment. Saifo was no longer the confident man who believed he had all the answers. News about the failed property sale and the broken business plans spread quickly among clients, suppliers, and employees. People who had trusted Grandpa for many years began asking questions about the future of the company. Some business partners decided to wait before signing new contracts because they were no longer sure what would happen next. Saifo slowly realized that rebuilding trust was much harder than making big promises. The company itself also needed time to recover. Several experienced employees had already left because they believed the values Grandpa had protected were disappearing. Important projects had been delayed, and many workers felt uncertain about their future. Instead of selling the business for quick money as he had planned, Saifo was now facing the difficult job of repairing the damage caused by his own decisions. Every mistake reminded him that leading a company required patience, responsibility, and careful thinking. A few days later, the trustees officially completed their review. They confirmed that Grandpa's instructions had been followed exactly as he had written them. Because Saifo had failed to meet the succession conditions, the protected trust would now pass to the alternate beneficiary. That beneficiary was me. When the lawyer announced my name, I did not feel excited or victorious. I did not believe Grandpa had loved me more than my brother. I simply understood what Grandpa had been trying to teach us all along. He had never rewarded people for being the loudest, the fastest, or the most confident. He rewarded the person who respected responsibility before reward. The trust came to me because I had never tried to take shortcuts or rush toward success without understanding the responsibility that came with it. Not long after that, my parents asked to meet with me. They looked very different from the proud people who had celebrated Saifo's inheritance only weeks earlier. My mother quietly admitted that they had treated Saifo as the favorite for many years and had often ignored my opinions. My father apologized for making me feel that I would never be good enough in their eyes. They said they finally understood why Grandpa had always encouraged me to ask questions instead of rushing into decisions. I accepted their apology because carrying anger forever would only create more pain. But I also knew that some wounds could not disappear overnight. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. Just like Grandpa's company, our family would also need patience, honesty, and many small steps before it could truly become strong again. 1 year passed, and when I looked back at everything that had happened, it felt like our lives had completely changed. The company that had almost been torn apart was now stronger than ever. Instead of chasing quick profits, we focused on the values Grandpa had spent his whole life protecting. We invested in our workers, completed projects with honesty, and rebuilt the trust of every client who had stood by us through the difficult months. Slowly, old customers returned, new contracts arrived, and the business began growing again. The people who had once worried that Grandpa's legacy would disappear could finally smile with confidence. Many of the experienced employees who had resigned after Saifo announced his plans decided to return. They told me they could see that the company once again stood for fairness, loyalty, and responsibility. I welcomed every one of them back because they had never abandoned Grandpa's values. They had simply been protecting what he had built. Working together again felt like bringing a family back together after a painful separation. The protected trust of $18.2 million was finally released according to Grandpa's instructions. I did not use the money to buy expensive cars or build a luxurious lifestyle. Instead, we expanded the business carefully, exactly as Grandpa had always dreamed. We bought better equipment, opened a new office, trained young engineers, and created more jobs for hardworking families. Every decision was made with the future in mind, not just the next profit. I often asked myself what Grandpa would have done before making any important choice. One morning, I stood outside our new company headquarters and looked at the building with pride. It was much larger than our old office, but what made me happiest was not the size of the building. It was seeing our employees walk through the doors with smiles on their faces, knowing they felt respected and secure. Clients trusted us again because they knew our word meant something. Grandpa's name was still respected, not because of the money he had left behind, but because of the principles he had lived by. As I stood there, I finally understood why Grandpa had designed the inheritance the way he did. He was never trying to create competition between his grandchildren. He was trying to protect the people, the business, and the values that had taken him a lifetime to build. He knew that buildings could be sold, money could be spent, and fortunes could disappear. Money can be inherited overnight. Character cannot. Some people spend their lives chasing the biggest inheritance. Others discover that the greatest reward belongs to the person who proves they can protect it. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments, should Saifo have been given a second chance, or did Grandpa make the right decision? Before you go, I want to hear what you think. Did Grandpa make the right decision by following the rules exactly, or should Saifo have been given a second chance? Tell me your answer in the comments. I read as many comments as I can, and I'd love to know what you would have done in this situation. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes that honesty, responsibility, and character matter more than money. See you in the next story.